What the most painful procedure, ailment, virus, disease you have ever experienced? My tailbone fractured spontaneously while I was sitting in a hard auditorium chair during a school assembly. I was 14, had to sit through the rest of the assembly and walk home that day, with my backpack banging against my lower back in the rain. You can't do shit for a broken tailbone. 20 years later, it still hurts. Story 2. Gallstones. I went through a 2-year ordeal with breast cancer, including chemo, blood transfusions, radiation, and 3 surgeries. My gallbladder attack was still the most painful. Story 3. A ruptured ovarian cyst. I got to the ear and promptly threw up at the nurse's check-in station from the pain. Nurse had a bag she pulled out so quickly she probably has to do it all the time. Story 4. Had an issue with my kidneys. Desperate, they put a fiber optic camera from my urethra to the kidney. Your penis can't help but get hard, but the camera can't move until you relax. Doctor was rushing me as I was his last patient of the day. Pain was beyond excruciating. It felt like I was pissing glass for a week, and that's with meds. Later, a competent doctor told, was supposed to be under for the procedure, but they decided to do it Civil War style. Story 5. I suffered an internal decapitation. I was an MMA fighter. Turned out I had bone cancer in my neck. C3 shattered while training. The surgery that saved my life removed C2, C4 in a vertebral artery. It was pretty brutal. The biopsies were horrible too, as they were sampling the tumor on my spinal cord. Chordoma. Crazy thing was, I walked around and worked for about 2 months with I3 shattered. It felt like a muscular injury in my neck. Too dumb to realize I was near death at the time. Story 6. Alcohol withdrawals. Shaking, vomiting, weakness, tired but can't sleep. Cold sweats, hallucinations, and feeling like you're losing your mind all simultaneously. Luckily, I made it through a few times, going on 1 year sober after a relapse after 5 years sober, followed by food poisoning. Story 7. Shingles. Don't let anyone tell you it's only for the elderly. I had it at 19. Sucked bad. I would randomly burst into tears from the nerve pain, and there was nothing at all that helped. Story 8. With my first kidney stone, I thought that had to be a 10/10 and that nothing could top it. Cancer said, hold my beer. A tumor in my celiac plexus was off the charts. Story 9. Had a bone spur about the size of a quarter digging into my spinal cord. Took 6 months to get it diagnosed. RT leg was numb, and LT leg was going numb. I was burning through pain med like chiclets. Towards the end, before surgery, I just said to talk to my wife. I couldn't think clearly. She was making all the decisions. Instant relief when I woke up. I had to ask the doctor what the problem was and what was done. Story 10. My kid brought home some sort of stomach bug from daycare last year, and I shit you not. I swear I think death would have been better. And I've had everything. Colds, fluss, COVID-19, broken bones. This thing rocked me like nothing ever has. Story 11. I have trigeminal neuralgia, aka the suicide disease, as the pain used to drive people to kill themselves to stop the pain. It primarily gives you painful electric shock on the face, TN1, but also can feel like you are being stabbed, burnt, sliced, too hot, too cold, ants crawling, like something is stuck in your teeth and other lovely things that a damaged nerve can come up with. Ton 2. I've had a surgery to place a Teflon pad between the nerve and the blood vessel that was rubbing the nerve raw, which has stopped the shocks. But as the nerve is now damaged, the TN2 persists, and I am on a cocktail of anti-epileptic drugs. I can't take the usual drug for TN, and I have an arsenal of painkillers. If it gets too bad, I have to head to hospital for IV painkillers. Story 12. I had a particularly traumatic spinal tap. The pain during the tap was so excruciating that I pissed myself and passed out. The headache afterward was so bad, I couldn't sleep. The brain Murray the day after with that headache was so debilitating that I contemplated suicide. The headache lasted 7 days. I spent 7 days laying in my bed in complete and utter agony until it went away. I will never get another spinal tap again, even if it's the only way to save my life. I, true earnest, would rather die. Story 13. Migraine. I know it's not a fatal issue, but let me tell you, the other week, one clobbered me so hard I was screaming. We went to her after I couldn't stop vomiting. When I got the how painful was it on the 1-10 scale, I told them I take that scale seriously. I said I hit 8, whereas I reserve 9 and 10 for dismemberment. Usually I can head them off, sorry for pun, with Relpax elatriptan. That RX is incredible, but sometimes I don't have the RX with me, or the nausea kicks in too fast to take the pill. Just sucks. Story 14. A particularly nasty period when I was in high school sent me to the ear on a morphine drip, so definitely that. Close second would be my IUD insertions. I'd like to be clear, though, that I love my IUD and don't regret it for a second. I haven't had a period in 5 years because of them, and I feel like I've been given a new lease on life. Story 15. Upper maxillary osteotomy. I had my maxilla cut out, strips cut into my hard palate, stretched out a bit wider, and then placed back into my face with brackets slightly lowering the back down to allow my molars to actually touch. I woke up from surgery with a plate spanning between my upper teeth to keep the upper jaw in its widened configuration. and my jaw wired shut. Imagine not being able to unclench your teeth and your tongue being stuck in the bottom of your mouth. My whole face was on fire for about a month. I had to wear an ice pack that wrapped around my whole head pretty much at all times. I couldn't eat solid food for 6 months. I had to live on drugs for the first 3 weeks. I was more or less a zombie for that whole time. When the fire that was the inside of my face subsided, I found that I couldn't feel my face anymore. The doctors had damaged the nerves that run through my jaw, and it left softball-sized areas on both sides of my face that I couldn't feel. Sensation returned to one side after 2 years, but I still have a silver dollar-sized area on the other side that I can't feel to this day. 5/7 would not recommend. Story 16. Hand-foot-mouth disease. I caught it from my boys when they were little. I got the full-on blisters on my hands and feet, a little less severe in my mouth. I was in agony, and nothing helped. I finally remembered I had some expired opiate painkillers that the doctors gave me after childbirth that I never used. Yeah, childbirth was way better than this. I took a half of one pill. Painkillers never actually killed pain for me before. They're addictive and dangerous, and just made me feel woozy, but still in pain. So I never used them. This time, in about 20 minutes, the excruciating nerve pain was dumbed down considerably. It only took a half a pill, and within a few hours, the worst of HFM had let up. But my God, I don't know what it would have done without that. A few months later, all my finger and toenails fell out BC of it, and my skin peeled like crazy. No sooner was the nail and skin stuff over than it caught HFM from my kids again. I took a half pill that time and spared myself the agony. Luckily, my kids didn't get it as severely as I did. I wouldn't wish HFM on my worst enemy. Story 17. I had eye surgery, and the eye surgeon accidentally scratched the cornea of my eye. I was on plenty of drugs when I got home, but within a few hours, I noticed I was having pain in my eye. It came in waves, and each wave got worse. By the time I decided I should probably go to urgent care, I'd begun that icy, cold, panicky dread when I felt a wave coming. I'd grit my teeth and my eyes would well up with tears, and I'd ride the wave the best I could. By the time we got to urgent care, the waves of pain were so bad I actually cried out in the waiting room and was stomping my foot like a rabbit. They took me back and I was almost delirious with pain. They squirted numbing agent in my eye, and the relief was so intense and so good that I remember sagging down in the chair and going limp and wanting to cry from relief, but trying so hard not to cry because I didn't want that numbing agent to leave my eye. Sus. My God, it was so painful. Story 18. I've had a perianal abscess that was quite large and 7 kidney stones at the same time. I had to take a month and a half off from work. Since I work for a manufacturer, we have our own doctor and nurses on staff. When talking to the doctor on my way back in, I felt guilty for taking the time off in some ways. He said he was glad I could make it back in only 1.5 months and it was totally justifiable, so I put that to rest. I believe it started with the abscess. They did an ultrasound and a CAT scan. They found no cats, and later noticed the 7 kidney stones, 2 of which were too large for me to pass, which leads to some fun surgery. The abscess pain completely masked the kidney stone pain. I've had kidney stones in the past, and my God, that is not something that usually gets masked. It is the master and commander of pain, at least from what I've experienced so far. The kind of pain where you can only lay down on your right side, in bed, for like a week. Story 19. Vasectomy. That Nescient had no idea how much pain I was in during the procedure. It's like he was ignorant of the existence of effective anesthetics. I flop-sweated through the paper gown so bad it was like tissue paper in a toilet by the time he finished his barbaric procedure. I felt the vas deferens pulled outside the skin of each testicle, cut, cauterized, and tucked back inside me. Seriously, that dude. Wish I remembered his name. I doxed the back out of him. It was a long time ago, but still. Story 20. Mine's tiny. I fell onto a glass bowl and cut my hand very deep. Went to the emergency room to get stitches. Not painful yet. After a long wait, the doc comes in and gets to work on my hand. Not painful yet. After he cleans the wound, he says, "Before I stitch you up, I'm going to give you a shot, and it's going to hurt." Okay. I've had shots before. I'm heavily tattooed. I have a really good tolerance for pain, especially if I know it's coming. Okay, doc, thanks for letting me know. And that mother ducker shot liquid fire and rusty razor blades into my hand. The burn started small, but escalated immediately to a pain I've never even imagined before, much less felt. I groaned at first, and as the pain skyrocketed, so did my volume. I screamed a scream that started in my balls and echoed off of neighboring planets. Without looking up from what he was doing, the doc says, "Yep, that's about right." Story 21. When I was younger, I once had period pains so bad that I thought I was dying. I'm usually someone who can withstand pain more than most, but for whatever reason, this one moth of a period was hell. It was so bad that all the color had drained from me. So I crawled to my bathroom and put the shower on cold to stop myself from passing out because I was so scared of not waking back up. Thankfully, my mother heard me wailing in pain and gave me some codeine, which only very slowly reduced the pain until it finally lifted after a day. I shudder at the thought of of ever feeling that level of pain again, and I've broken bones and live with chronic conditions. Story 22. Double middle ear infection. It was excruciating. Every sound felt like I was being stabbed in the head. It went on for 9 days before I could get antibiotics. My hearing has been noticeably worse since. 10/10 seriously would not recommend. Story 23. Inverted uterus after giving birth to my daughter. The doctor had to manually, with her fist and arm, put my uterus back inside of me as I was hemorrhaging. Pain meds had worn off at this point. I truly thought I was going to die by the looks on the nurses' faces. I could have died, in fact, but my doctor was extremely competent, thank goodness. Story 24. Ovarian torsion for me. It's when your ovary twists around, caused by a cyst in my case. Blood flow to the ovary is cut off, and the ovary begins to die. Ovaries have the same nerve endings testicles do. So the nurses equated the pain I was experiencing to what a man would feel if his balls were twisted around and then wrapped tightly in a rubber band. It's by far the worst pain I've ever experienced, and my body's been through some shit. Story 25. Late-term abortion. Medically necessary. Left alone to labor in a tiny room with a cot and nothing else for hours. Checked on occasionally. During the actual delivery, I was told repeatedly that I was too loud and it wouldn't help to scream. Story 26. I was injured in a bomb blast. Random terror attack. Had shrapnels all over my body, over 100 scars. Lost a foot and eardrum. That wasn't the most painful part. The most painful part was the procedure. Hospital didn't have anesthetics. Had to operate on me to save my life while I was awake. I wish I was dead back then. After that, I got addicted to drugs for pain. Audited many times. Also had kidney stones and other side effects. Currently trying to get sober again. Been over 10 years now. Story 27. Sounds dramatic, but I would rather take a bullet to the head than to ever have to endure an infected tooth ever again. Probably some of the most mind-numbing, traumatic pain I've ever experienced. I've had the tip of my nose cut off, endured 2/3 degree burns over a large portion of my thigh, nearly lost a pinky toe to a bike chain. That was all child's play compared to that goddamn tooth. It felt like pure electricity running through my jaw. All I could do was roll around and cry, since no painkillers could even touch the pain. Brush your teeth 2x a day, floss, and get your regular cleanings. I can assure you the discomfort of a simple cleaning outweighs the pain and eventual process of getting it pulled. Whole experience was barbaric, 10/10. Story 28, not very impressive, but I was experiencing some form of tennis elbow that was slowly but surely getting worse and worse over time. It eventually got to the point where I had to go see the doctor. They said they would give me a shot of steroids directly into the tendon or whatever, and that should take care of it. She said, a few people have a bad reaction to the steroids, but you should be fine. A few hours later, I was in bed in so much pain, I couldn't even think about moving that elbow without wanting to scream. It eventually got to the point where the pain was so ridiculously bad, I was laughing and crying at the same time. It was truly the worst physical pain I had ever felt. Mainly, I guess, because it was all localized in one spot, not spread out. Lasted a few hours. Story 29. Gout. I've woken up without the ability to walk or move my arm or wrist several times over the years. It's the randomness that really gets to me. Just one day, for no particular reason, you wake up and something hurts so bad that you wonder what you did in a previous life to deserve the pain. It's not like I'm an alcoholic on a bender. That would at least make sense. It just seems like playing dice, and every day is a gamble on if something doesn't work. Changing weather makes it worse, and traveling by air can cause an attack. I've had several trips where I woke the next morning and not been able to walk, with no change in diet. Yes, I take the meds, and I've had this since I was 24. It's like a sick little genetic game of dice. Story 30. Most painful? Sounds silly, coming from a chronically ill person, but strep. I had a case so bad my throat swelled shut and I couldn't breathe. I was intubated. It was rough, most miserable, though. My first virus during long-term immunosuppressants. What started as the sniffles for somebody else left me comatose, literally, for 3 days. I got sick on a Monday with aches and pains, think a bad flu, and from Wednesday to Friday, I was in the hospital in a coma. Saturday, I woke up, and 2 weeks later, I was functioning, but even nearly a year later, I haven't recovered fully. All this to say, if your chronically ill or immunocompromised friend/relative/loved one says to stay away when you're sick, stay away. We can die. Story 31. Maternal sepsis from chorioamnionitis. I felt my kidneys failing through the epidural administered, which is why the anesthesiologist did not believe me at first when I complained of flank pain. Quote, "You can't be experiencing any pain. You've had an epidural." A nurse went and pulled another doctor to evaluate. My fever spiked to 106 degrees and my HR went up to 200. Then my baby's HR dropped and it became a big emergency surgery. Baby is now 5 years old and starting kindergarten. I do believe we owe my life and hers to the nurse who went and sought another opinion after seeing us dismissed by the anesthesiologist, who did come in and apologize the next day. Story 32. PID, pelvic inflammatory disease. I slept around a bit after moving to a new city on my own at a fresh 18. I had a symptomatic chlamydia for months without knowing it. Even though I knew better, I was with multiple new partners often and was not getting tested regularly. I started to have horrible lower back pain to the point that I couldn't sit down or walk without sobbing. Towards the end, it felt like someone was legitimately trying to rip my uterus out of my body, squishing and stabbing it at the same time. The ER sent me home with 7 different kinds of meds. That morphine was great, but almost going into sepsis was not. Story 33, Pilonidal cyst. Had 2 of them in the span of 3 months, one of which was during finals week in college. Absolute agony. I could not sit, lay down, walk, or do anything without feeling immense pain in the ass, literally. The second one burst open in the middle of the night and ruined my bed sheets and underwear. I had to make myself a makeshift diaper of a few rags while I drove myself to the doctor. It hasn't come back since then, but I infrequently feel a pain back there if I sit a certain way. If it got any tracks or anything. But I've already decided on getting surgery for it if it ever comes back. Story 34. I was bitten by a dog near my face and it nipped my lip. It wasn't a big bite, but it was considered a category 3 threat because the bite was on my face, so it's near the brain. Went to the ER to get an anti-rabies shot. Turns out I needed 8 shots. 2 for the legs, 2 for my arms, and 2 on my face. Was asked to lay down for the shots on my face, and a male nurse held me down, but I managed to jerk him away. I'm a 5'0" woman. Because it was so painful when they did the first shot near my lips, we had to take a break for the second shot to proceed. Story 35. Whooping cough. I got it as a teenager. My throat was incredibly sore from coughing and vomiting, but that was absolutely nothing on the agony of my muscles. Every muscle from my abs to my neck was so sore and stiff that breathing hurt. When another coughing fit hit, it was like all of those muscles were on fire as they were pushed into use again. And then as my throat spasmed and I started choking and vomiting while coughing, my body would just fight harder to breathe and it hurt even more. About a week in, I heard one of my ribs break and somehow the pain got worse. 10/10 whooping cough was living hell. Story 36. Personally for me, it was COVID. I literally almost died. Couldn't sleep due to having blood in my lungs. The pain of laying down, sitting, and walking was unbearable. Besides all the pain also when breathing and the lack of sleep was driving me crazy. Story 37. Gave birth naturally. Honorable mention, I was hospitalized with diff. Almost died. Felt like my colon was suggesting razor blades and turning inside out at the same time. Story 38. I had a miscarriage a year ago and had no idea the pain I would experience. It hurt worse than labor. No doctor would take me seriously and prescribe a pain med. I went to the ER twice in 1 week. Was in pain an entire month and missed several weeks of work. And dear God, the blood. I honestly thought miscarriages were something that simply went away and women exaggerated it. No, we don't. Story 39. Dry socket and a sprained jaw from a botched wisdom tooth removal. I have given birth 3 times, and I would do it 3 more times before going through that again. I have also broken my tailbone, and it was nothing compared to mouth pain. The only thing comparable was before my wisdom teeth were yanked. I used to get massive multiple canker sores at a time. Story 40. Full thickness, 3rd-degree burns to 20% of my body, including both hands. The debridement is torture, and you're awake, and without anesthetic, and in my case, watching it. Literally having your burnt skin peeled off too, 3 times per week for 6 weeks. Story 41. Severe sunburn, like so bad I had to go to hospital and have it treated. It was all over my back, shoulders, and chest. It had blistered up over the previous days. These blisters were the size of tennis balls, and the blisters had burst. But unfortunately, the skin covering the blisters had stuck to my clothing and ripped off. I couldn't really move my arms and shoulders for a while where the skin was so dry. Don't forget sun cream, no matter how cloudy it is outside. The sun is a deadly laser. Story 42. Intestinal obstruction. They got caught around rejected staples from an appendectomy, and I ignored it way too long. Almost died in the ER on the bathroom floor waiting to be seen. The pain came in waves and felt like someone was reaching inside my stomach with their hand and twisting. They had to cut a portion of my small intestine and colon out, as they had died from lack of blood flow. Before passing out in the ER, I remember saying, "Oh shit, I'm going to die," and it playing on repeat in my head. Story 43. Emergency cesarean section after nearly 2 days of labor and feeling every bit of it the last 10 hours before having the surgery, and then developing an infection from it, and mastitis at the same time and nearly dying. Hardest 8-week recovery ever. But I got through it and nurses my son for just over 2 years, and we're trying for another baby because this one will be a repeat cesarean and I won't have to go through the labor. And now we know I need medication beforehand to prevent infection. Story 44. There are a lot of really rough ones here, but my own worst is a toss-up between getting my IUD and having it switched routinely. Not diminishing super severe things like bone marrow stuff. That's the definition of hardcore. But IUDs are rough. Worth it, but rough. Story 45. Disc herniation. I've had the pleasure of going through it not once, but twice in 2 different areas of my spine approx 2 years apart. The initial month or 2 of healing was brutal. Long term, The concussion and soft tissue damage that happened in both accidents has caused over a decade of varying levels of discomfort, despite me taking pretty darn good care of myself. Natural childbirth and a C-section doesn't even compare. Story 46. I've had a lot of painful things happen. Tooth nerve pain, broken floating rib in my back, plus back spasms, kidney stones, broken eye socket, shattered elbow, severe, acute, necrotizing pancreatitis, broken, sprained ankles. Oddly enough, the few times I've had a broken nose, it didn't really hurt that much. Story 47. Kidney stone. I was crying in a fetal position in the air for hours before they saw me. Threw up all over the floor. It was horrible. The Dilaudid they gave me when I was finally seen was the single greatest feeling of relief I can imagine. Story 48. Herniated discs in my lower back. It got to the point where I was laughing and crying hysterically on the floor of a doctor's office waiting for cortisone injection. I couldn't stop laughing, and the doctor couldn't get the needle into position in my spine. Got a microdiscectomy soon after which relieved the shooting leg pain. I can't take painkillers because I'm a recovering drug addict. Story 49. Pilonidal cyst. I couldn't walk or sit for almost a week. Got it drained at the ear. They took me to a back room far away from people. I have never screamed from pain, but the scream I scrumped was so serious. They had to squeeze it all out after they cut it open. It felt like the doctor was squeezing for hours. The whole procedure took about 3 minutes. Story 50. Twisted, then ruptured ovarian cyst. Damn that noise. Trying not to scream and cry in a hospital bed for hours in pain while the male nurse and doctor rolled their eyes, saying it can't be that bad and they were sure it'll pass. They took it mildly seriously, only after the diagnostics proved what it was. My partner wanted to punch them in the face. I wanted to die. Story 51. At the time, colposcopy. My obgyn is normally great, but did not warn me whatsoever how painful this procedure would be. I was told to take an Advil prior to my appointment as it might feel a bit uncomfortable. I was not expecting him to basically take a hole puncher to my cervix. I got home and just cried, mostly out of shock at what I had just experienced. Story 52. Gout attack. I'm at 15 tattoos, including my wrist and ribs, and gout was worse, and lasted like 2 weeks. Some women have said it was comparable to childbirth on the pain level, but the gout baby is tiny shards of asshole crystals in your joints. Story 53. An ovarian cyst burst, and I was told by doctors it was probably just regular period pain. They gave me ibuprofen and sent me on my way. It was so bad, I ended up getting a terrible fever and went to a walk-in clinic the next day where they were able to surmise what happened and sent me back to the ER. Story 54. Gallstones are crap. You have an attack, think you're dying, go to an ear. Then they schedule you for several months out and wish you luck. I passed a gallstone while at the hospital. Thought I was having a heart attack. They scheduled me for surgery 7 weeks out. Didn't make it more than a week before I had to have emergency surgery. Story 55. My wife and I got dengue fever last year. Platelets dropped to 0. We bled all over the place from every orifice. Every bone felt like it was breaking again and again at every moment. As a grown man, I cried for 2 days straight. I've never felt pain like I did during that period. Hers was worse than mine. Story 56. Inguinal hernia. They cut a nerve during the procedure, and it took about a year to be able to walk at a normal pace. In my 30s, for reference. I can equate the pain to having red-hot rebar laid on your abdomen for 2 years straight. Story 57. I was vomiting for 4 days. I went to hospital for a week. I had high fever for 15 days, and I was completely dehydrated and super weak for a couple of months. Many tests. No one found what was the reason. Story 58. Most painful I've had was severe ingrown toenails on both feet. Extremely unpleasant. And I had some stubbed toes that made me almost pass out. But in the grand scheme of things, I've come out pretty good. Dodged most of the more painful things in life. Story 59. Natural childbirth. I had planned on having an epidural, never even considered going all natural. But my second came so fast there was just not time. It was horrific. I'll never put myself in that position again. Given there were other things going on that added to the pain, but my God, it was traumatic. Story 60. I broke my humerus about 1 inch from the shoulder joint. The doc and I thought it was dislocated, so he tried to pop it back into place. The popping sound was just the 2 ends of my bone rubbing against each other. Hopefully, that's the worst I ever got to deal with. Story 61. Gout. It's ducking awful. It runs in my family. I had a proper doctor give me a prescription for allopurinol, daily use maintenance. He also gave me a prescription for indomethacin. That's for when you think you may have an attack coming. Gout sucks. Medicine exists. Use the medicine. Story 62. Myositis in the leg. It would start spasming in pain if I tried to sit up. Sometimes the pain would get too intense that I feel nauseous or pass out. I was basically paralyzed from the waist down for a couple of days. Story 63. Late to the party here, but cluster headaches. Had meningitis when I was 14, and it left me with A 24/7 headache that persists 15 years later, and B, seizure-inducing cluster headaches, which went on for a good 8 years or so. Super cool. Story 64. Nothing compared to some of the stuff on here, but torn Achilles is worse one I've personally gone through. The initial injury hurt, but what was a real mother ducker was the post-op pain after the nerve block wore off. Norcos barely took the edge off. Story 65. Not being able to urinate for 2 days due to a swollen prostate. And then the 6 attempts it took the ear staff to get a catheter into my bladder so it could drain. 1.5 liters of urine came out. Story 66. Believe it or not, getting my tonsils out as an adult, it's a whole different ballgame as a grown-up. I couldn't believe my aunt said I'd need 3 weeks off of work for recovery, but he was right. Story 67. Deep infiltrating endometriosis. Multiple organ adhesions, adhesions of my uterine and iliac arteries, and adhesions on my ureter. Ruptured endometrioma cysts. For over 10 years, I was told that what I was feeling was normal. Story 68. Chickenpox at 34. I had it everywhere. It hit with a vengeance. I was on fire for 2 weeks. Pain everywhere. If I owned a gun, I would not be here. Story 69. Kidney stone passing through my ureter. It was the worst night of my life in the ear. Came in with what I thought was the worst stomach ache of my life. Ended up being a 6 mm kidney stone. Story 70. Mono at age 33. I got all the side effects too. Swollen eyelids, inflamed tonsils, fever for 45 days straight, jaundice, acute hepatitis. Horrific time. Then straight into getting COVID for the first time. Story 71. Viral meningitis. It was the worst head pain I ever had, and still have light sensitivity afterwards. Getting a lumbar puncture sounded awful, but was easier to deal with than my head. Luckily, it was viral and not bacterial. Story 72. Gallstones, 100%. Really high pain tolerance, and I want, in the fetal position, crying before I decided to go to the ear. Had multiple attacks before I finally could get it removed. Worst pain I've ever experienced. Story 73. Severe alcohol withdrawals. Pain isn't the right word for it, really. It's just pure agony. I'm not religious, but I do believe in hell because I've been there. Story 74. When I was a kid, my appendix ruptured inside of me. I was in IQ for 2 months with sepsis. The feeling of something on an organ popping inside of you, it's unexplainable. Story 75. 2nd degree sunburns on the top of my feet. I was a lifeguard. First day ever on the job. Forgot to sunscreen my feet. Blistered up, swollen, couldn't walk for a week.